Prosecutions, otherwise known as the DPP for short. Now, you may have seen a lot of stories on the newspapers and the television over the last few weeks referencing the office of the DPP. And quite frankly, something which started off very simple and very reasonable, which is a call for more human resources by the DPP, prosecutors in this case, has now turned into a major bacchanal. I can't describe it as anything else. I would have to say a major bacchanal involving some key players. The DPP himself, Roger Gaspard, Senior Counsel, Attorney General Reginald Armour, Senior Counsel, Chief Justice Ivor Archie, the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, and even the Law Association of Trinidad and Tobago have all weighed in on these issues with the DPP. So joining us tonight to shed some light on these issues affecting the DPP and try to make some sense out of the bacchanal are the Honorable Member of Parliament for Barataria Sawa, Mr. Saddam Hosein, and the Honorable Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial, both of whom are attorneys of law. I would like to say a very special welcome to our esteemed panelists. I mean, we are truly honored to have the both of you all here with us tonight. No strangers to critical conversations, so thanks so much again for making the time to join us. I would also like to say a special welcome to you, our viewers, who are joining us on Zoom, and as well as those who will join us on Facebook and YouTube, and also those who are going to look at the program after the live, which many do. Also, a special welcome to members of the media, members of the Compass Foundation, and last but not least, my three co-moderators tonight, the PRO, Chris Hussain, Miss Shanta Supersad, the treasurer of the Compass Foundation, and Mr. Safraz Ali, former councillor and HSC officer. So as usual, we will aim to end the show between 9 and 9:30, but I get a feeling tonight going to be a really, really exciting night. Right, we tend to do a hard stop by 9:30, and we will aim to stop by 9:30. We are going to have a panel discussion as we normally do, and after the panel discussion, we will have Q&A and open mic. So without further ado, I would like to pass you on to our PRO, Mr. Chris Hussain, who will kick off our panel discussion.
Thank you, Lisha. So a pleasant good night to everyone who would have joined us, and of course our panel for tonight. So just to get straight into this immediately, MP, why don't you start us off with an opening statement? Is there an attack on the office of the DPP?
Good night. Firstly, to everyone who's joining us here on the Zoom platform, my colleague Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial, I see Safraz, you, Chris, Shanta, and Lisha, and those who are logged on to this Zoom meeting. And this is probably one of the most critical conversations that we will have. As we, myself and Jayanti, can attest growing up into the legal profession and studying law, you would have heard about the stories of the hounding out of a DPP out of office and political interference when it comes to the prosecution of political opponents. But now, today, we live in that reality. And that is something that I was speaking to some of my colleagues about, that a blind man can see that there is a concerted strategic attack on the independent office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. This whole issue with respect to staffing, with respect to space accommodation, this is not any new issue. This issue spanned the People's Partnership government, it spanned the PNM governments, and this is not a new issue. What we are seeing here is an attack on the DPP, and one, I can stand very bravely and say this, it is motivated by the fact that there were two collapsed prosecutions against UNC members. That is the collapse of the prosecution against Mr. Rambukan and Mr. Ramdeen, phase one, and secondly, the dismissal of the matters regarding Mr. Pandey and the other accused in the PIAPO number 3 matters. We knew that the DPP office was understaffed. We knew that they were outside, they were on Richmond Street crying out for space. But the only thing changed was that these two prosecutions collapsed that favored the PNM politically. And the whole issue about this is that this is right now the PNM getting Roger Gaspard back. Mr. Gaspard didn't take a decision to just willy-nilly stop these prosecutions. When you look at the facts of this entire thing with respect to Mr. Ramlogan and Mr. Ramdeen, you have a former Attorney General making a deal with a witness, offering inducements, presidential pardon, millions of dollars in terms of payment of fees that were owed to him, promises not to prosecute him, promises not to give that information over to foreign jurisdictions. And that is what motivated the collapse of that entire matter that was indicated to the public by the Director of Public Prosecutions. When you look at Mr. Pandey's matter, that matter has spanned over 2 decades now, and they still want to get at Mr. Pandey. So that is the whole motivating factor why there's a systemic attack to get Roger Gaspard out of office. And I said this on Sunday. It could have been Roger Gaspard, it could have been Carla Brown Antoine, it could have been Geoff Henderson, Mark Mohammed. You ought not to touch the office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. No political appointee should be DPP in that manner.
Saddam, how about you fucking shut your dumb fucking mouth?
So, Senator, we want to get your comments on this as well. Now, I know that...
Mate, Chris, you too. Shut your dumb mouth.
I know there was this issue. I see we have some fans that joined us. Good night.
Yes, well, those fans have just been removed, so they're no longer fans.
Oh, it could have been fun. But anyways, so yes. So Senator Lutchmedial, serious issues we're dealing here with tonight. Clearly, there are some persons that are trying to scandalize this forum tonight to distract. But you know, the MP made reference to the dismissal of certain cases, and I know that you brought this up in one of your senatorial contributions, and I would have gotten under some person's skin, right? So your senatorial colleagues. But what are some of your opening statements for this? Do you really think that the office of the DPP is under an attack? Do you think so?
I certainly believe that all of the characters involved in this whole scenario fully aware and cognizant of the issues. I believe that they are all persons who hold, at the end of the day, we are talking about a Prime Minister, a Chief Justice, an Attorney General, and the Director of Public Prosecutions. That's four of the highest, if not the highest office holders, all with constitutional authority and holding high constitutional office. And they're all capable of discussing these issues privately without having, I could only describe as a cuss out in the media. And I cannot for the life of me comprehend why anyone in the capacity of a Prime Minister would mount a political platform and speak about security details and so on as it relates to the office of the DPP, a very high security environment. I cannot understand why a man who has notoriously underperformed in the 1 year that he has held office would publicly undermine confidence in the office of the DPP, such an important institution in our criminal justice system, by talking about underperformance and saying that, you know, about staff and so on, you know, and basically insult public servants. That's just not heard of and done in this country. And the Chief Justice would issue a 10-page letter via the media highlighting issues that he has with what he calls the management of the department, and also making reference to certain appeals being made by the DPP for staff and so on, and sort of criticizing and undermining the DPP by questioning whether or not those are reasonable requests. So all in all, I agree with everything that MP Saddam says, but I will go a step further. Apart from collapsed prosecutions, there are also some potential prosecutions that may either never get off the ground or could get off the ground. And I'll draw reference to a couple of them. The UNC, through very strong advocacy from our MPs and senators, have requested and received confirmation that the matter of whether or not there has been misbehavior in public office by the Prime Minister with respect to the Police Service Commission merit list debacle will be receiving the attention and has to be looked at, because Senator Naked, I think, wrote about 11 letters and it was eventually acknowledged by the DPP. Senator Naked and another MP, I think it was MP Rambali, accompanied him in a legal capacity to have a meeting concerning the Nelson indemnity and whether or not that amounted to an attempt to pervert the course of justice and whether the former Attorney General should be investigated and possibly charged. And I'll go even further and make reference to some of the matters in which I am now. I have the privilege of being one of the few MPs. I'm a claimant, a defendant, and counsel before the court right now, because I am I'm defending lawsuits. I've sued public authorities for disclosure of information, and I also appear as an attorney for other people. But there are matters where we know that there are members of the cabinet who are being investigated by the TTPS, and it will ultimately fall to the Director of Public Prosecutions to determine whether charges should be brought against them. So all in all, and I will say this at this point in time, when you look at the promises being made to Mr. Nelson, the person really standing in the way of the PNM achieving everything they want to achieve, the person creating the problems for the PNM, and preventing them from using that Vincent Nelson scenario to the best advantage is the DPP, because he has to participate in any decision or recommendation for a presidential pardon, one of the promises that was made. If it is, and again, timelines are important. We learned on Sunday, and I almost fell off my rocking chair on Sunday morning when I saw the front page of the Newsday and the letter written by the attorneys representing Mr. Nelson on last Wednesday. Last Wednesday, they basically wrote to the DPP and said, listen, withdraw these charges, clear my record, clear my name. If the DPP were to comply with that request and to do something like that, that would solve a multiplicity of problems for the government. They could basically, Nelson would withdraw his lawsuit against them. They could then have the charges against Mr. Ram Logan and Mr. Ramdeen reinstated, because the Director of Public Prosecution said that if Nelson is willing to give evidence and that whole civil lawsuit thing works itself out and he's willing to give evidence, he will consider bringing back the charges. So it falls to the DPP to make a lot of decisions which directly affect the political directorate at this point in time. And I think those things, the timelines, when you look at them, the combination of things and the way they have operated in their public undermining of that office, it really speaks volumes to the intentions and the motivations of the government.
Senator or even MP Hussein, in July 2019, Dr. Rowley failed to initiate impeachment proceedings against the Chief Justice Archie after disregarding the Law Association's advice to invoke Section 137 proceedings against the Chief Justice. Now we are seeing the Prime Minister and the Chief Justice, if you want to say, ganging up on the DPP. Do you think this may be payback by the CJ? So in a case of you do my bidding, I do yours. What are your thoughts on that?
Go ahead, MP.
So let me be very careful with what I'm saying here, because at the end of the day, I'm a judicial. I'm counsel in the courts, and therefore we owe a duty to the courts. But when a high office holder, such as the Chief Justice, descends into the political guile, where basically no one asked for his opinion on a particular matter, where there was an unsolicited and unprovoked attack on an independent office, one has to ask those questions, Shanta, and I think it's a very important question, because it is the Prime Minister, and I cast no aspersion, it is the Prime Minister who triggers disciplinary action against any Chief Justice in this country. Again, we have seen in the past where this has happened with respect to the PNM government, and we must always remember that, because this is what we are witnessing here today is history repeating itself, where the government is starting to interfere with independent institutions. We have spoken about this time and time again. They tried in the Parliament And that is why the opposition is there to oppose them when they try to bring special majority bills that infringes on the separation of powers doctrine. We would oppose it. My friend Senator Lutchmedial and one of the best attorneys at law in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Ram Logan, will take these matters all the way up to the Privy Council to have them struck down. We had them interfering with the procurement legislation. They're trying to interfere with the BIR, which holds sensitive financial information, and putting it into the Inverts Revenue Authority, the IRA. And then you have seen time and time again that the PNM has tried to erode these independent offices. And we must be very careful when a prime minister makes such remarks, followed by the attorney general, and then an unprovoked, unsolicited 10-page statement, followed by the Chief Justice. I didn't hear the Chief Justice address anything like the lack of cat reporters in the court that was holding up murder trials that he lamented about several years ago in the opening of the law term. I didn't hear him talking about having the prison system working in a proper manner so that those MSIs can take place in a timely fashion. When you appear before the bail court, every Thursday you will have court hearings of bail in terms of capital murders. You would not hear the Chief Justice talk about that there's a lack of reports being given to the judicial officers before they make a determination of whether to grant bail. Some persons' bail application are pending for about a year since the Achille Charles decision because there's a failure within the system to prevent the necessary reports to the judicial officers who are making decisions. You're not hearing him talk about the probate registry, and I know Jayanti will have this experience where persons are waiting maybe 3 years before they could get a grant, and that holds up a lot of land transactions in Trinidad and Tobago because of the state of the probate registry. But then you hear the Chief Justice launched a 10-page attack telling the DPP how much prosecutors he needs. Telling the DPP, this is the separation of powers doctrine that we always advocate. That is not the business of the Chief Justice. It is the DPP who determines. He is the head of the criminal law department. He will determine how many prosecutors he needs. The Chief Justice is not the one to tell him, you need to put a prosecutor in every court. People do fail to realize in this country that most of the prosecution that takes place, I believe it's about 90% of the prosecution in this country, it's the TTPS. 10% is done by the office of the DPP. When you go to magistrates court, you will see police prosecutors present as the district courts that they have now. The DPP is the Chief Justice is quite, he's directing himself in the wrong place when it comes to making recommendations of those administrative issues. I think he should stick within the halls of justice and now the waterfront in Port of Spain.
Well, actually, MP, that actually goes into my question here. I think you answered it partially, so I'll allow Senator to jump in here. But my question goes like this, right? The Chief Justice, when he made that 10-page statement, according to the opposition leader last night, he made it in his capacity as chairman of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. Well, Senator MP, you just answered it partially, as I said, but was in his capacity as chairman of the JLSC, did he have any legal remit or constitutional remit to make those comments? In other words, is the DPP answerable to him as the chairman of the JLSC or even CJ?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. As Chief Justice, you sit as the chairman of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. Perhaps the time has come for us to revisit that provision in the Constitution, because we've clearly seen here now where there may be a blurring of those lines, and it may cause some challenges. But yes, to an extent, the person who the JLSC is the employer of the Director of Public Prosecutions. They appoint, they have the powers of discipline, and so on. So again, this is like, let me draw a very simple explanation for this. You work in a supermarket, and you are the manager of a branch of the supermarket, and this supermarket doesn't have enough staff, so people lining up by the door and they can't get in and they complaining, and the supermarket basically not making enough money and they can't get anything done, and goods pack up outside and can't get offloaded in time because they just don't have the staff. So you keep asking for staff, and then there's like a Massey store, right? And then all of a sudden the chairman of Massey issues a letter saying, identifying all the problems that you have and saying, look, all the food rotting outside is because of you. It's because you're not asking for staff on time. It's because you're not doing this. It's almost like you are an employer and you have an obligation to engage and to do so in a constructive way. And this goes beyond a scenario of a supermarket. This is a person with the constitutional. People don't understand sometimes how important the office of the DPP is, and the person who heads that department, how huge of a responsibility they have and how much power they have. This is that one single man whose name and probably eyes probably jumping all over because his name has been called so much time. But Roger Gaspard at this point in time, due to the office that he holds, can literally say today that any single person should be charged for a criminal offense, or that any single person who is charged should be released. That's how much power he wields. And so someone who has that type of power, you do not undermine a person like that publicly, and an entire department that's working on things like that. The other thing is that I found in analyzing the statement that the Chief Justice overlooked a number of things. He made reference to the number of High Court criminal judges in the High Court, and sort of tried to draw a reference and extrapolate from that about the need for and the number of prosecutors, totally ignoring that in the magistrates' courts, if a public officer is charged, a member of the protective services, all of the murder inquiries still require the input of a prosecutor. Prosecutors do much more than just appear before the judge. They have to do groundwork. So oftentimes, and I remember my days, for those who don't know, both MP Hosein and I started our careers at the office of the DPP. So we know all too well the stress and the pressures. But I remember from my days, it was not just appearing before a judge every morning. It was, reviewing files, drafting the indictments. Sometimes police would submit files for advice, and the director would ask you to assist and do an opinion. There's a lot of work. And the fact is, and this is something, again, that the DPP spoke about in his initial interview, which I think is what triggered all this backlash against him. He spoke about an exercise that was undertaken, which the Chief Justice would be aware of as the head of the JLSC, where, and the number wasn't plucked out of the sky. There was a comprehensive job evaluation exercise, something that happens within the public service, where you want to restructure a particular department and so within the public service. And that was done by the People's Partnership, because you see, you don't just sit down and listen to somebody complain and then say, well, all right, I go send 10 lawyers for you this week, and all right, we go get 20 more. And you're sending all these junior lawyers who cannot fill the positions of the senior people who are leaving the department, right? So there was a comprehensive exercise done, and there was a determination that this is the correct amount of staff proportionate to the duties, responsibilities, and the amount of work that this department has. So how you could come now and say, well, we only have 13 judges, so I don't know what I want all them prosecutors for. That's what's being said. Again, giving the impression that the DPP is being unreasonable, the same way the Prime Minister seemed to suggest to the public that the DPP was being unreasonable for not wanting to occupy a building. And, up to now, nobody, not in the government, and I think it is, it falls to the DPP, although I know it is perhaps not in his nature to get into a tit for tat via the media. But I do believe that he must clarify at this point in time about the recommendations made about that building, when they were made, and how much work has been completed by the government. Because Rowley mounts a platform and we spent $40-something million fixing this, that, the next. Well, what have you done? Have you fulfilled it? Do you believe that the recommendations made were unreasonable? So all of these things must factor in when you are, as the employer, as the head of the employment organization, the person to whom the DPP is answerable for his performance. You must factor in those things. Has the DPP acted unreasonably? I think that is only fair to do so. And I don't think that is beyond the comprehension of the Chief Justice. He's a very intelligent man. And, he must understand what is fair to the DPP. And all the DPP really did say is that he has an issue with staffing and is desperate for it. The Chief Justice will also be aware, and I raised this in my last budget contribution in October, that a significant amount of persons left the DPP's department to fill positions in other arms of the criminal justice system. And I made the point that that's why you call it a system. It's component parts that all have to work together. So if one organization is drawing down the other one, so a whole host of lower to mid-level staff left to go to the new expanded legal aid and advisory authority to become public defenders. And then all of the upper level and middle management of the department left to take up judicial appointment because they created and expanded the number of posts available for judges and masters and so on of the High Court. And I am not in the system and I'm aware of this, so I assume the people in the system are aware. But when you have that happening and then you say, okay, we'll hire 10 more lawyers and it's all junior staff members, then what are you supposed to do with that? Can you take somebody who is 6 months out of law school and tell them go and prosecute a murder case? No, you can't. So what you have is a torso with a head, but the arms and legs are missing. So the movement is very constrained by that. You're barely surviving. And that is what I see happening. And that's what everything that we have read and all of the complaints that we've heard from the DPP, I believe that is exactly what is taking place. The issue of space and a building has to go hand in hand with staffing because the building cannot go to court and prosecute people. But you also cannot have the staff to go to court and do those things unless you have somewhere to put them. All right. So again, basic management and management of resources, both human and physical resources, would tell you that these things had to be working hand in hand simultaneously. In order to move the system forward and to get things to be done effectively. So as the overall manager and boss of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission, I think those things ought to factor into any statement being made by someone who again holds such high office as a Chief Justice.
But Senator, just as a follow-up, sorry to my colleagues, right? But as a follow-up to this, right? And I don't know if MP Saddam want to jump in here. One may argue that yes, he's the chairman, but he's also the Chief Justice, which means he's in charge of the whole judiciary. And one would have expected that he would be a little more circumspect in the way how he's dealing with an administrative matter, such as with the DPP. And therefore, as MP Saddam said, it was an unsolicited 10-page response. Was that, and MP, I would just like to, if you could close over this point, was it proper for the Chief Justice to write that in a public forum, or could he have handled it in a private setting where he could have asked the DPP, what are your challenges and how I can assist?
I'm not saying MP Saddam.
Let me just,
I think he might have fallen off. So until he comes back, let me just give a synopsis, a brief answer. The answer is certainly yes. The answer is that, again, as I said, persons holding such high office ought not to descend into a public tit for tat. Right. I don't believe that anything that was said by the DPP about the running of the department and his challenges ought to have triggered that sort of response. Part of the response of the Chief Justice spoke to efforts that the JLSC had made toward filling vacancies and so on. But that could have been addressed directly with the DPP in a private forum, I think. And as an attorney, as somebody who understands the system, as somebody who works in the system and has worked in that department and interact all the time with people who are involved in this, all I would have expected would have been a closed door meeting with the Chief Justice, the Attorney General, because the Attorney General is responsible for hiring contract staff for the department, and the DPP and senior members of his department to discuss and to work out a way to short-term solutions and then long-term solutions, which really and truly the only long-term solution that I see is implementing the structure that was put in place and approved by Cabinet in 2013, which is yet to see the light of day. We have a tendency, anything that's done by a previous government, that we threw it by the wayside. But I would like to know the justification for this government not implementing that plan to restructure the department and to hire staff to fill the positions.
Okay, before I get into my question, though, I want to welcome everybody who has joined us on social media. We do have a very, very large audience. The last time I checked, it was a little over 200 people. So, guys, we really, really appreciate your enthusiasm and interest for this program. And there is a lot of enthusiasm. I'm seeing the chats be flooded with questions. And we will get around to the questions, but we just want to have a little bit more discussion with our panelists tonight, because there's some key areas that we want to cover. And then we'll get into the Q&A. And I know somebody had their hand up. We will also have the open mic in a few minutes, starting in a few minutes. I do want to ask a question though, right? Last night's opposition Monday night's report, the opposition leader, the Honorable Kamala Persad-Bissessem, made some statements which we would like to inquire into. And I quote, PNM is afraid of DPP Gasper because of their shady deals with Nelson, a clear case of witness tampering. They want to remove DPP Gasper and replace him with another PNM puppet. The TTPS must investigate. So I would like to know, do you think, Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial, because I'm not seeing MP Hosein here with us, do you think that the PNM really wants to just get rid of Gaspard and they want to replace him with a PNM puppet, as the opposition leader is inferring? Do you think that's reasonable?
So I tend to judge people's actions in the context of history. And let me give you a piece of history that I lived through. At the time when in 2009 and so on, when you had John Jeremy being the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, there was it came out later on that he had been placing significant pressure on DPP Geoffrey Henderson to bring charges against Mr. Pandey and Lawrence Dupree. In fact, there's a whole, and I shared it on my Facebook page, an old report written at the time that set out in detail correspondence that had been flowing back and forth between the two. Jeremy was basically saying, look, I've hired counsel who say, you know, go ahead, and we have external counsel, British counsel and so on, who say that the charges could be brought. Henderson responding and saying, look, that's not the case, etc., etc. And Henderson, there was an actual attempt to almost push him out of office. And at the time, when recommendations were made by the then JLSC to fill positions to act as DPP and so on, Roger Gaspard was recommended, and the Prime Minister exercised his power of veto. The Prime Minister at the time, they didn't want Gaspard since then. And they re-advertised and went back again, and there was another round. And the JLSC came back again and said, well, this is the person who has topped the merit list. You know, PNM have a history with merit lists. I don't know what they have against merit lists. They don't like merit. You know, they take away merit from scholarship. They don't acknowledge merit for SCA. Even they don't have police service merit list. Since then, they don't like merit lists. And he came back on the top of the merit list, and he was supposed to be and eventually, you know, they sort of conceded and went. But even then, there was actually the Criminal Bar Association, headed by then very well-respected criminal practitioner, Mr. Desmond Allam, wrote to and asked for an investigation into the conduct of the PNM Attorney General in trying to influence the prosecution of persons. Two, and perhaps a third is on the brink of collapse, and that is another, which is Piaco number one, but two prosecutions in this country against Chief Justice Sharma and one against Mr. Pandey collapsed because of interference by you know, government ministers in the PNM with the process and with the judicial process. So let us judge people by their history. And I would say that given the history that we know of, and given all that we know of, I've spoken about it again in the past as well, that this government has essentially tried to contract out the prosecutorial function. I see another fan of the Balize is commenting and leaving us. And yes, and I hope that I'm so happy that you all are here so that you could listen and perhaps learn something. And you know, what was I saying? It's so funny that people actually have time to do this. But they try to contract out the prosecutorial function of the DPP's office for $45 million to a British firm with clear instructions that they must look at political, you know, people who held political office under the partnership administration. So I see here history repeating itself. And I see a DPP who is being, as Mr. Henderson was being back in 2009, is being cautious and being faithful to his constitutional duty and remit. And so I do believe that, there's a concerted effort to undermine public confidence in him. Whether it is because, look, let us be real. Let us talk about what the public perceives here. The public, depending on their political suasion, if the DPP ends a particular prosecution, he's a UNC. And if he does certain things that are against the UNC, well, he's a PNM. And persons perhaps don't realize and understand that it's generally, you have a legal duty and you are bound by certain principles when you hold office like that. And if somebody is committed to doing their duty, and doesn't agree with the the political directorates, and they seem to be attacking a person. I never heard anybody call Roger Gaspard a bad manager or complain about how he was running his department when he made a decision not to prosecute Patrick Manning because of Manning's ill health. There was a report from the Integrity Commission that recommended to the DPP, and that's not a power that we see being exercised very regularly by the Integrity Commission, but based on the failure or the actions of Mr. Manning as it related to not granting our radio license to the Mahasabha. When the Integrity Commission investigated, they actually sent a report to the DPP, and the justification for not initiating or pursuing a prosecution in those cases given by the same DPP today was, Manning's ill health, he hadn't been attending Parliament, etc. And so it was determined, and the DPP made a determination not to proceed along the lines of that particular inquiry. Nothing was wrong with him then? No, I didn't hear anybody say that he was mismanaging his department at that point in time. So when you take all of those things together, you take the PNM's behavior and their history of interfering in prosecutions, you take the manner in which they have conducted themselves of late with respect to particular investigations and what they have been doing and what they've been calling for, I think that those are extremely fair and insightful comments being made by the political leader.
I see MP Saddam Hosein is back with us, and I would like to give him the opportunity to respond to that question as well. The question being with respect to the opposition leader's comments last night that the PNM wants to replace Roger Gaspard with a PNM puppet. What are your views on that?
It seemed as though it was only Roger Gaspard they wanted outside. I do apologize for those technical difficulties that I just...
Okay, it happens.
So I listened to what the leader of the opposition had to say last night, and she's quite right to make such a comment, and I will tell you why. I keep going back to the history of this matter. When Mr. Henderson, who was the DPP, was hounded out of office and bullied out of office by a PNM Attorney General, Mr. Jeremy, Mr. Gaspard was recommended by the JLSC on 2 occasions. And on 2 occasions, the PNM government, PNM Prime Minister, took a decision to veto the appointment of Mr. Roger Gaspard. Not once, twice. Never giving a single reason to the population of why that appointment was vetoed twice. So it shows that the PNM never found favor with Mr. Gaspard. Now, I'm holding no brief for Mr. Gaspard, but one now has to wonder, why has the PNM tried so hard, even from inception, to not allow him to sit in the office of the DPP? Because, Jayanti, you may remember that before, when that whole entire issue with respect to Mr. Gaspard appointment was being made, there was a threat by the prosecutors at the DPP's office not to turn up in court. Because
I was one of them.
They were give him an acting appointment finally, and that is what quelled the disturbance at that point in time. But it has always been a concerted effort to get Mr. Gaspard. And that is the modus operandi again of the PNM. They want to take control of everything. They have installed a president, they have the prime minister in the folds of the PNM, and now they want to have someone in the office of the DPP who they may be able to control. And that is because the PNM cannot win an election on performance, Let me make this abundantly clear. The PNM is a government that cannot perform. We have seen it throughout the history. A UNC government has shown time and time again that we can deliver because you know why? We have competence. We have the ability to deliver the goods and services to the people. The PNM wins on propaganda. It is pure propaganda. When they won the election at that time, they used the prosecution of Mr. Pandey. Then they went on to go on platforms to use the prosecution of Mr. Ramlogan and Mr. Ramdeen in the 2020 general election. The PNM won elections on propaganda. We're hearing about corruption since 2015. That is what they went into office with, that they'll fight corruption. Today, what have we seen? Collapsed prosecutions. Collapsed prosecutions. You have not seen any of what the PNM have said come to fruition. All you have seen is they benefit their friends, families, and financiers. They are the ones who benefit from this. But I just want to touch on one particular issue. It was a question that Senator Lutchmedial was responding to in terms of the recommendation by the Chief Justice in terms of the number of prosecutions. When I was at the office of the DPP, the introduction of the criminal procedure rules, the new criminal procedure rules were coming on stream. And therefore, it was a new area in which they were trying to look at for the expeditious determination of criminal matters, because we all know how long criminal matters can take. I used some statistics on Sunday. I believe there were about over 1,000 matters that are 10 years old that is sitting in the judiciary. I could be subject to corrected. I could reference from the annual report of the judiciary. But the criminal procedure rules was something, okay, so let me explain it to you. Before the criminal procedure rules, defense and prosecution goes to court. Well, Your Worship, we do have a file. Okay, next adjourn date. Defense stands up. We're not ready, Your Worship. We're seeking a short adjournment. Matter adjourned. And what happens? The matter just keeps getting pushed down and down the road. With the criminal procedure rules, what takes place now is the magistrate sits as a case manager, just like in the civil courts. So they will give directions. You must file statements by this date. You must do X by this date. There must be disclosure by this date. And then trial will be set by this date. And if you are not complying with these directions, then either party can make various applications for the matter to be dealt with. And that is why you needed the additional number of prosecutors, because you needed to start complying with strict deadlines. Because the invent of the criminal procedure rules was to kill what we call the adjournment culture in Trinidad and Tobago. So that is the entire thinking behind increasing the number of prosecutions for the office, because you had to assign case management officers for each particular matter that you have under these new rules. So an office holder telling another office holder how to do their job is simply inappropriate.
Time and time again, we are seeing independent office holders being attacked by PNM officials. Senator Lutchmedial or even MP Saddam, what constitutional protection is there to uphold that separation of powers to protect these independent office holders?
I want to say that. I mean, it's when you have, generally speaking, you would have, and what we've seen are perhaps political attacks coming from the executive when you come to our independent institutions. And that's where our service commissions play a very important role, because the service commissions, being the employers, have procedures and so on to follow. I think that is really the issue of why the Chief Justice letter and his response to Gaspard via the media is a bit troubling. Because here we not only have the executive arm, but we have the actual service commission, the head of that service commission, getting into the fray, and it does raise questions about the protections. The DPP is an independent office, but there are a number of challenges that they face. I could point out, for example, financial autonomy. They don't have financial autonomy. They fall under the Office of the Attorney General with respect to budgeting and getting monies for everything, basically. So whereas the legal function that has to be carried out, he is independent in that respect. He depends on other offices and other office holders and has to work with them in order to get things. So he's answerable to the JLSC headed by the Chief Justice for his performance, and he's also dependent on the Attorney General and the Cabinet for the release of funds and financing and budgets. So that's it's a very tricky and precarious situation that he finds himself in. And I would say that perhaps there's insufficient protections.
I want to agree with Jayanti. It's probably time that we look at reforming our constitution. I think the time for constitutional reform has come when our constitution, we have two constitutions in Trinidad and Tobago. We started off with the 1962 independent constitution, and then we had some changes in terms of the 1976 Republican Constitution. And we have to look at what took place during that era. 1976, today we are in 2023. And the Constitution is always interpreted as a living instrument, but it is so long something can live for. And we probably have to look at whether or not we have to put certain safeguards in terms of very important and independent institutions. I just want to also add to Jayanti's comment in terms of the DPP can also be answerable to the Parliament, because I remember before he would have appeared before joint select committees to deal with certain, to account for certain things that was taking place at his office. And it is only then that the public became fully aware there was a joint select committee of national security sometime in 2017, where the DPP came there and had to be, he was, to put it in a way that I felt that he was embarrassed to ask the Parliament Joint Select Committee for photocopiers. He was complaining that he did not have photocopiers at his office. And that was in 2017. So we really have to look at this, because let me give you one example, Chantal. You asked that is a critical question, because let's just rewind a couple of years ago when the Prime Minister interfered, and we hear it now, there's an ambition with respect to the merit list at President's House for the appointment of the Commissioner of Police. And look at where that took us. It took Trinidad and Tobago down an unprecedented path where we did not have a Commissioner of Police, Jayanti, I believe, for 3 or 4 months.
Yes, quite some time. Mm-hmm.
A Commissioner of Police. And that again shows whether or not all of these processes with respect to these independent institutions need to be reviewed. We also have to look also at the relevance of the office of the president. And these are some of the very critical issues that we have to face. We thank those, our forefathers, for giving us these constitutions and built with these democratic principles. But we are the future. And this constitution is going to govern us and those who come after us. And I think young people now have to play a critical and a more important role in terms of making recommendations and for calling for constitutional reform in Trinidad and Tobago, because we now live in modern democracies. What may have been acceptable back then may not be so now. And I think young people have to really take this fight forward for constitutional reform.
MP, I'm glad you gave that answer, because it leads to my next question. Actually, I was going to stick to the script and ask, well, who does the DPP really answer to? Is there anybody? But I'll hold that question for a while. If you guys want to answer it, one time it's up to you. But I would like to ask, I was listening with some youth from the Diego Martin area today, and they were asking me, well, what's the big deal? What's the big deal if we get if the government get the DPP replaced? Because for the common man, a lot of them don't know the extent or the impact of having a DPP being replaced. So I don't know, for the benefit of those who not so current with the legal implications, could either the MP or the senator explain why is this situation so dangerous, and if they are successful in getting the DPP replaced, and who does the DPP answer to at the end of the day?
Do you want to take this one, or you?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said before, he's answerable to the Service Commission. They are his employers. So he's answerable to the entire Judicial and Legal Services Commission, which is headed by the Chief Justice. What is the danger? It's exactly what I said, in that, in that one person resides a tremendous amount of power that could basically make or break the life of a person, and any person. And the danger here lies particularly because there are some very politically sensitive matters which we know are engaging the attention of the DPP. Piako and the Nelson prosecution of Ramdeen and Ramlokan are just two of them, but there may be others, and there perhaps are others. Before any single person could be charged, the police have to make a determination, and the only person who can advise them, or who they are authorized by law to take advice from, is the DPP. Similarly, if someone is charged by the police, the only person, as in like his literal signature, is required on a document to withdraw a matter against a person, is the DPP. So that is a tremendous amount of power that he wields over everything. Jumping off of what MP Saddam said about performance and not being able to do a performance, the PNM have a history of drowning the population with allegations of corruption. And before the 2020 election, I'm talking about, maybe the election was on what day, August, what, 14th or 21st, somewhere around there. There were a number of stories carried in the media about charges are coming against high-ranking members of the partnership administration, coming from EMBD and all of that. And the next day in the newspaper, there was an article where the director came out and said, there's work still to be done. I mean, he basically was not satisfied with what was being said, that the charge was to be brought. I don't know that I sit very well with the powers that be, but that was a massive attempt to drown the population on the eve of election with allegations of corruption. And we live in a society where when people hear about $10 million something, and I mean, that influences your voting pattern and your history. And history will show that it influences how you exercise your franchise. And so, again, these are matters where if the DPP were to remain silent and bat in his crease, the political arm of the state can have their way. They could put forward whatever they want and say what they want. I was actually quite surprised that he made a public statement about that matter on the eve of the election. Perhaps he thought it was the right thing to do. I don't know. I don't want to suppose that I could read his mind in any way. But those are some of the things that will be affected if the government is able to change the individual and have someone who is more controllable and perhaps more pliable, and who is willing to play along with their antics and their strategy.
And Safra, just also to add to what Jayanti said, you would hear on the political platform, we heard it right in Barataria, charges are coming against UNC members. How does the Prime Minister and the Minister of National Security know that? That is not a matter within their remit. That is a matter solely within the remit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. No politician should be getting involved in any political or any criminal prosecutions. If they do, that is something called political persecution. And if you don't have the office of the DPP there to stand between the government and the courts, then the government, anybody who has a dissenting view of the government, they could simply just lock them up and put them before the courts. And we know how long it takes in this country for a matter to be determined in the criminal courts. So that is why you have to have these offices to really stand in the way of the government. Because if you don't have such important offices, then, I mean, the only thing separating us from that now is that it's going to be a dictatorship. And we have seen that this government acts in the most dictatorial manner. I mean, I don't want to go down the road of the RIC consultations and what took place there, but you have seen time and time again that they have tried their best to silence people in this country when they speak out against them. And if they don't silence them, they try to align themselves with these groups. So therefore, they don't speak out against the government. And you cannot do that because it's not healthy for democracy at all. There must be free speech. You must be able to be condemned. And as a government, you have every avenue in order to defend yourself or change your behavior in line with what the people want and in the best interest of the country.
Okay,
MP,
guys,
do you think at this current venture that the government will be interested in, changing themselves and aligning with what the people want? Do you think that they would?
I think this government, if I have to put it very lightly, Chris, I know there are some very beautiful language being used on this platform tonight, which I would not engage myself in. But what I would say is that this government has lost its way. They have lost their way. I wouldn't be compelled to use my acronym that I used in Parliament again, but they have lost their way.
They have lost their way.
Let me again, I judge people by their actions. I want to read a couple of things, and these are documents that we've referred to already in Parliament and so on and on political platforms. But I'll tell you this, you could judge whether or not a government wants to change and align themselves with the wants and needs of the people when I tell you about this. I'll read from Cabinet Note number 1320, which was brought on July the 24th, 2020, just before the general election, where an approval, the Cabinet was asked to ratify a decision of the Prime Minister for the grant of covering approval for the engagement of English law firm EMM, Open Text UK, PricewaterhouseCoopers for professional services to the TTPS from 2019 to 2020. This is, they were now approving funding for things that they had in train to the tune of almost 50 million TT dollars. Do you think, does that sound like a government that's interested in what the people want? The same people who are now asking for the government not to increase their electricity rates, the same people who are asking the government to fix the pothole and the collapsing bridges and so on, and to perhaps introduce a little more the fuel subsidy. I want to also read from some of the documents that we have access to, written by this English law firm, where they say, and updates that they have been writing to the Commissioner of Police, the prosecution of political controlling minds would be preferable. The ultimate goal would be to identify ministerial misconduct. That is of the greatest importance. That these are people being paid with our money that doesn't buy drugs in the hospital, doesn't fix road, doesn't fix, the education system, not hiring prosecutors for sure for the DPP's office, being paid to them to target political rivals. Now, the government has a tendency to not understand what people want, but to tell people what they want. And that is the modus operandi of this government. They tell you that, listen, we can't do these things because there's so much corruption and we must go after those who are corrupt. And that is what they are doing. But they will not, and again, drown you in the propaganda. So are they going to align themselves more with what people want? No, they will tell people what it is they need. And they will convince their supporters by use of these large numbers and talk about, we think that anything that come from our way good, right? That's a Trinity thing, right? So if I give you this here and say it was made here and it working 10 times better than this that come from foreign, you want this one, right? So they'll tell you we have the biggest English law firms who are saying that there's evidence to prosecute. Well, if there was evidence to prosecute anybody in the People's Partnership Administration, you've been in power for the last 7 years, going on 8 years. Why hasn't it been done? $45 million later. And the thing is that unless you're willing to be an inquiring mind to the extent that you question those things, I fear that the PNM will continue to tell people what it is they need and convince people that this is what they want and this is what they need, rather than realigning themselves with what people actually do need. Because the basic needs of the people of this country are not being met, whilst our money is funding political witch hunts where they can't even find a witch up to now. and that's just the reality.
Let me I just want to end it with one statement. Your question, Chris, is that they are interested in government. They are not interested in governance.
Well said.
Very-
Mhm. All right, now guys, just doing a time check. It is 9 p.m. right now, and we are into the Q&A and open mic segment of the program, right? So I did see we are going to make a hard stop at 9:30. I believe that Saddam has parliament in the morning. Ramdev, I believe you had your hand up. You want to go ahead and make your comments? All right.
But the mic was open. We started, you know.
Yeah. Okay. So there is a question here on the chat from Richard. If the CJ is the head of the judiciary and administrative body, I would think that the recommendations from the Joint Select Committee regarding the DPP's challenges would have gone to the CJ. But again, what is the purpose of the Joint Selection Committee? And there were a number of questions with respect to what purpose does the Joint Selection Committee serve. So maybe we could address that.
Okay, so the Joint Select Committees of Parliament, with respect to that one year DPP would have appeared before was the JLSC on National Security. At that time, that would have been the 12th Parliament, and I believe we had the MP for St. Augustine, Mr. Ramada, was the opposition person at that time, and I believe Mr. Stage was there in the Senate. And those Joint Select Committees, what they eventually do is that they compile reports, and those reports are sent to the various ministries. So for example, the JSC would make a recommendation. It would say, we recommend that they hire X amount of prosecutors. We recommend that they look at the office space. They recommend that they do X, Y, and Z. And then once those reports are sent to the various ministries, the ministries will now action those recommendations. And you will see another report coming to the Parliament called the Ministerial Response to the Joint Select Committee report on X. So therefore, there is some level of follow-up when recommendations are made. And I just want to make this clear, and I said this at the entire night, we're going back into history. It was a United National Congress government that ensured that Joint Select Committees were made part of the Constitution. And that is why we have that level of accountability for office holders to come before the Parliament, for ministries to come before the Parliament to really tell us what is going on. Because sometimes when we hear from the technocrats in the ministry, it's a different story that the ministers sometimes paint in the Parliament. Sometimes you get the real story out of these technocrats, because the ministers tend to paint it in a political light as though everything is hunky-dory, as you say. But really, we see the issue. So the Joint Select Committees is clearly a way for the opposition, especially to really get those answers out of those government ministries and departments and even other independent institutions of what is really taking place in some of those
MP, while Lisha is scanning for other questions, right? A question that came to my mind. If, for example, a member of the public feels threatened, for example, when MP Hines had made the comment that those UNCs, whenever they see them, they're like vampires. They have to take a wooden stake and drive it through their hearts. Now, a UNC supporter might feel intimidated and might say that that is inciting violence coming from a office holder. Does the member of the public, can they write the DPP asking for this to be looked at in more detail with a view for possible charges, or do they write the Commissioner of Police? How does a member of the public who feel threatened by comments from office holders? What avenue are there for them?
Firstly, I just want to answer. You just take Hines seriously.
Well, if you're not sleeping, we try to get grasp whenever he's not sleeping.
The second thing, he walked into his constituency and a man threw water on top of him, and the man ended up getting prosecuted in the magistrate's court. I mean, Mr. Hines is totally irrelevant, but as far as those types of comments find no place in Trinidad and Tobago, we are free to disagree politically, but when it comes to the inciting of violence, that is where you must draw a line. And I think that in particular, those comments that was made by Mr. Hines should have been strongly condemned. And if that had led in terms of some uprising and violence or anything like that, there are various offenses in law that he could have been found himself to be contravening and prosecuted before the courts.
But the question is, who leads the charge then? Is it the DPP could ask the Commissioner of Police to look into it, or is it the Commissioner of Police will have to investigate first and then seek the DPP advice on it?
Once
Either way,
you have to have the consent of the DPP, I believe, before you could proceed with any charges in relation to the citizen.
All right, there's some questions here on the chat that making me laugh, and they really have nothing to do with the topics that we are discussing tonight. What I want to know is how Balisay House is getting funded. I know you can't raise over 50 million from raffle tickets and selling sweetbread and cake.
I am no, listen, that's actually a good question, because again, if it is that an investigation was to take place, for example, let me just give a very hypothetical situation. If, for example, a number of state-owned companies were giving contracts to contractors and so on who are very closely affiliated with the government minister, and it turns out that when those payments are being made, it was going into the personal account of a government minister. And somebody like maybe an opposition senator were to file a freedom of information request and get those checks and expose it. And then that would then trigger the FIU and the Financial Investigations Bureau of the TTPS to file for production orders and go into the accounts, all of the accounts of these companies and the government minister. And they were to find out that through the award of contracts from state enterprises, like, any state enterprise, you could pick anyone. So which one close to you? MTS? That's close to your constituency. So maybe, let's just say, and that money from state contracts was then going directly to a personal account, and that personal account was funding the construction of any building. But let's just say, for example, maybe hypothetically Balisay House. That would be something that the DPP would be very interested in, and the DPP would be required to review all of the evidence and determine whether charges should be brought. If a government minister, for example, also has a number of business interests in bars and other types of establishments, and they may be selling alcohol without a license, sounds very petty, but it's still breaking the law, and the police were to confront them and request from them that they produce their license, and they don't have one, that sort of a file would be submitted to the DPP to give instructions on whether or not our government minister should be charged. So, and again, why, all of those things are very hypothetical situations which may arise at different times. So all of the possible questions that people may have surrounding the activities of politicians, whether they're in the government or in the opposition, it is the DPP who makes those decisions. It speaks to the importance of that office.
MP, this also includes a government minister who allegedly was in land grabbing.
This was a hypothetical situation, right? This was makeup, right?
Okay, I see Trinity Bone with his hand up. Maybe we could just give him the opportunity to speak. Trini?
I'm not hearing.
We're not hearing you. If you are trying to speak, you're on mute. Right.
Hi, good night, ladies and gentlemen. Good night, senators. We have two very learned senators here with some excellent presentations. Thank you for all the education. I would like to start off with gangsterism. What we see happening here is exactly what we see happening in all our schools. We see a bully would face off with someone because they don't like them or because they have something against them. And then when the fight starts, everybody jumps in. And that is exactly what we have going on here. That is where our children in our schools learned it from, the PNM. That is exactly how the PNM has operated ever since Eric Williams' days. They have used gangsterism to attack all persons who are in opposition to them and their policies and whatever they want to achieve. It's gangsterism. All the people, we have 4 individuals. We have the Prime Minister being compromised with the Bliss Sipasad issue. We have, and the President. We have our Chief Justice, who is also compromised and has allegations against him. We have our ex-Attorney General, who is compromised also because of this Nelson Gate issue, doing unconstitutional stuff that he is not authorized to do. We have our Attorney General, our existing Attorney General, compromised also, went into a U.S. court and perjured himself, lied in a U.S. court about people who he defended as a senior counsel in a Trinidad court. He went into a U.S. court and he lied about that. What resulted? We spent millions of dollars and they are now eligible to sue the state. They are eligible to, they are free. We have to spend more money if we have to prosecute them. So he's compromised too. So they all have cocoa in the sun. And the only person who can probably bring prosecution against them is the DPP. That's the man who can attack them, who can say, yes, if somebody like Safraz or somebody was suggesting earlier, if somebody like me or somebody like that citizen decides to say, listen, I feel as a citizen that my Prime Minister did something wrong, is compromised, or my Attorney General did something wrong, and I want redress for this. And I have financial backing to follow that through the courts, all the way to the Privy Council. Then these people are now, who are compromised, see our DPP as someone who can say yes. And as MP Saddam pointed out, they were always against this DPP from the start because they knew they couldn't turn up his screws to get him to be part of the Cosa Nostra. And that is exactly what we have going on here. Gangsterism against a DPP who they see as a threat to their existence, or who can be a threat to their existence. And that is something that goes on to what Safraz was talking about too. How do we, as a so-called democracy, what is in place for us to prevent this kind of behavior by any government, whether it's PNM, UNC? We need to look into constitutional reform, and our legal minds need to look into how can we defend ourselves against something like this, because what we have here is a runaway dictatorship. I don't know your views before I continue more on this.
Thank you, Tony.
I think definitely constitutional reform is really and truly something that has to be looked at, because as you say, the independence of the office, and as I mentioned earlier, yes, you could be independent once you're in the position, but what prevents somebody from taking you out of the position or preventing you from getting into the position if you don't want to appear to be part of the boys club, and if you don't seem to be the person who wants to be controlled? So it may very well be that there's a requirement, but look, this is not the only country in the world with a DPP. It's not the only country in the world that has politicians that have to either be investigated or have politicians that try to get their rivals investigated and prosecuted. That happens all over the world. What you do need, it really and truly is an electorate that is informed enough to make informed decisions about these things. Because I don't know that every other country in the world where a DPP comes under direct attack on the eve of, or just on the, after two very politically sensitive prosecutions fall through, and he's attacked by the opposing side, who to whom these decisions were unfavorable, I don't know that the electorate would take that so lightly. I think they would put aside whatever prejudices they may have, and they would look at those things and they would make informed decisions, because you can't legislate for everything, you know. At the end of the day, somebody has to appoint the DPP, and everybody has a political suasion one way or the other. And our system isn't that much different from many other systems in the world, and it works because you have a much more, I think, unbiased and informed electorate, willing to make informed decisions and to judge politicians by their actions and how well they adhere to and uphold the rule of law, as opposed to seeking their own interests. So I don't want to put the responsibility, or I don't want to accept all the responsibility and to say that, you know, the politicians have to fix the constitution. You can't fix, there's an expression I'm saying, but it's, you can't fix stupid. Well, you can't fix everybody. You can't fix everything with a constitution. At some point in time, the people, what's a country? What is a parliament? It's just people elected to represent the people. That's what a democracy is. For the people, by the people, of the people. We are of the people, and it is all of the people who have to come together and open their eyes and make decisions about the type of governance and government that they want.
Just to follow up on what you said, I agree with everything you're saying, but Mr. Ramesh Lawrence Maharaj had thrown out a suggestion a while back. I didn't read up on this, so I am trying to call it out from memory, and it's a long time ago. Referendum. How can a citizen go about making, asking, getting us together and asking for a referendum on issues like this here?
Well, I'll jump straight to it. When the People's Partnership Administration was in power and we set up a commission to make recommendations for constitutional reform, one of the things that we wanted to introduce, in addition to other things like power of recall, runoff system, we introduced proportional representation to an extent in local governments, etc. We wanted to expand on it, but we also wanted to introduce that concept of referendum. It was one of the recommendations made. That issue reared its head recently as well, when there was a debate about replacing the Privy Council with the Caribbean Court of Justice. And I remember in the Senate, because that motion was moved by the government, the Senator Vieira, asking for the CCJ to take over from the Privy Council. And in the Senate, we specifically said, have a referendum, because we have other Caribbean countries that do that. Referendum means, because you see, when you vote in an election, you vote on a broad range of issues. A power of referendum, if it is built into your constitution, means that the government can trigger a mini election on a very specific issue. And that's a tremendous tool that you could use to really, because listen, I may like a particular party, I may think that they're excellent at governance, etc., but there may be a specific issue that I have a particular line on and that I don't agree with the government on, and I would like the government's decision ultimately on that issue to be based on how I feel, and I would like to have a say. So I think that referendum is an extremely useful tool in a democracy, and it really enhances participation by the public in political processes and decision making and governance. But you need to amend the constitution to include that as part of your as part of a power that can be triggered by the governments.
Sorry, you're suggesting that it is not in the constitution, but Mr. Maharaj was saying something different. He's saying that it can come through the court. If you bring up an issue in court, then you can force a referendum, even though it is not the constitution. No, I'm winging this because that is what I understood from what he said way back when. I don't know if you could.
Well, in the other Commonwealth jurisdictions that I'm aware of, I think that it's a power that's included in the constitution.
And that there will have to, it's required to have legislative change to introduce that referendum. I know some jurisdictions too would have introduced it through acts of parliament, that if a bill comes through the referendum, there's a referendum act, and certain laws will apply to the referendum act. So the only referendum we have in Trinidad and Tobago is elections, basically, to elect a government.
General and local, general elections.
Basically the wide ambit of what that's the only time the people really get to participate in the full democracy of the country in terms of general elections. But yes, Trini, I think you hit the nail on the head with your initial presentation, and all of these issues all tie back to the general umbrella of constitutional reform. And I think it's time. It's really time. It's ripe for this discussion now, because we have seen institutions fail us time and time again.
No, I was going to say that there's several questions on constitutional reform on the chats, right? But I think we need to have a separate session altogether to address constitutional reform, because it is a hot topic and it's a topic that is very much in demand. I see one more person with their hand up, Umar Abdullah. Maybe we can give him a chance to speak and then we can close off after that. Umar, go ahead.
Yes, greetings, everybody.
Greetings.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm the leader of the First Wave Movement. And, I'm hearing all this talk about referendum and constitutional reform and all of that. I want to remind this meeting here tonight, we have a sitting president presently. And this sitting president is basically a representation of the People's National Movement. And if you all could remember, when the president at the time, Paul Weeks, would have gone abroad, and Christine Tandler, who was the acting president at the time, government made a stint in Parliament to change the Data Protection Act. And what happened was, before then, nobody could have accessed the medical records of any person in Trinidad and Tobago. After they changed the act in Parliament, and they do this because there's no opposition to say the least. All right. So whatever they do in Parliament, they run amok in Parliament and they do what they want. They pass these bills and they create these laws and they send it to the president to sign, go to a send. They waited until Paula May Weeks went abroad, and when Christine Kangaloo went and acting as the president, she ascended the bill in the teeth of the night. This woman that has been placed as the president, she is going to do the PNM's bidding. How much could the opposition do and the people of this country do to stop the government? They've gone rogue. For the last 3 years, our constitution has been suspended. For those of you who wants to disagree, could do so. But I'm telling you, our constitution has been suspended. Our democracy has been eroded and our sovereignty has been given away. All these non-disclosure agreements that government is signing, how much weight or how much power did the opposition have in getting government not to sign those non-disclosure agreements? How are we to know what is in those non-disclosure agreements? What are we giving away? What are we selling? Who are we giving away to? There's no way to know these things.
If I may interject,
yeah.
If I may interject for a sec, because I want them to unpack everything that you're saying, and I know I see you're going on a line there where I know there's more you want to add, so I'll allow you to add it. Senator, I think you wanted to add something to this. You wanted to comment? I saw you.
No, I mean I'm hearing everything that's being said. One saying comes to mind where it's just that the opposition will have its say, but the government will have its way. And that, unfortunately, is part of our Westminster system. Save and accept special majority legislation, which the opposition can block if they have the requisite majority or if the independent bench joins with them, as we have been able to persuade them to do in at least one case that I can remember in recent times. The government is allowed to pass legislation. Now, I wonder sometimes when I hear comments like there's effectively no opposition, what could the opposition do, etc. Well, what the opposition can do is, and which the opposition does do, is to highlight the issue. But who can do something? The voters. So if it is you feel that your constitutional rights have been suspended for the last couple of years, and if it is that you feel very strongly about non-disclosure agreements and so on, I tell people all the time, the power to change all of that is not with the opposition, it's not with any particular person, it's right here. You use this and you get rid of it. And when we have a huge portion of our population not voting in a general election and citing things like, everybody's the same and so on and so forth. These are the issues, and the purpose of fora like this one and many others that I've been on this week is to highlight, and everything that the opposition has said about the particular president being unfit for office and making a counter recommendation and so on is exactly because of the things that you are saying. And so I tend to take a position that may not be popular amongst politicians, but I like to tell people that nobody's coming to save you. You have to save yourself. And you really do need to save yourself via voting in a general election in order to change the particular government that you do not like.
Right. And that's exactly the point I'm trying to get at. And I want to open up the doorway a little more, because if you look at the last couple of elections that went by, particularly the last election, how many of the electorate would have voted, right? And how many of that electorate would have voted for the opposition? And how many would have voted for the political party? I'm talking about numbers here. I'm not talking about seats. All right? And right there is your referendum. Right there is your referendum. There is no referendum that this government has any legitimate purpose in office at this point in time. None whatsoever. Even after the last general election. So why? So the point I'm making is, and you talk about the people, and the people has the requisite power. But if the people don't go and vote, well, then what next? And that's why I constantly and I continuously remind people that civil disobedience have never failed in no country of the world.
I just want to interject, if I may interject, we do have to have a hard close at 9:30, as interesting as this conversation may be going.
I will end at that point, because I don't want to, because it's going to carry it further. But, having said that, I think I've said what I want to say, and I think I would have opened up the doorway a little wider and expanded the conversation a little more. But even if we end at 9:30, there's a lot more that can be said, and there's a lot more coaxing and coaching that needs to be done, and a lot more has to be said in a way strategically to invite and to attract people in understanding what they need to do to change their circumstance. Look at what the RC is doing. I made the point in point 14, and I told them, I said, you honestly believe you're going to go into San Fernando this evening and expect that you're going to get a support and a welcome in San Fernando? You've gone every single place in Trinidad and they've rejected you.
Okay, Mr. Abdullah, Mr. Abdullah, I'm so sorry to have to cut you off, but it is 9:29.
That's okay.
We really appreciate your coming here and your contribution, and I hope you could join us again. Chiaro, Chris, would you like to close off?
Definitely. Before I close off, I also want to join in saying that I really appreciated his contribution as well, and I hope he will join us again. But MP, I saw that you wanted to interject briefly.
Yeah. There's one point that I think Omar touched on, which was very important, with respect to the number of votes and the elections. You would see when election results come in that the majority of Trinidad and Tobago is yellow, but yet we lose the election. And that is a common debate that comes up election after election. And we really have to look back again at whether or not it's time for proportional representation in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, our democracy has continuously evolved, and we had tried to introduce it through the local government with the selection of aldermen. And that is a point that we have to look at again. And I think I want to make a recommendation. I may be like the Chief Justice and out of jurisdiction here, But I want to make a recommendation to you all that we need to have a frank discussion on constitutional reform.
Agreed.
And critical conversations. I challenge you all to really try to champion that particular topic. And I would
Right,
be
certainly.
available to you.
We need 3 hours.
We may need
Lish-
days. Really.
Could I just ask, perhaps I don't know if Chris or Alicia, if any of you just could find the report that came out of the commission on constitutional reform. It's available online. It's a very, very good report. And if you could share it on your social media and so on, because it's an excellent read. It's not perfect, but it's a start. Since then, of course, this is 2014 or so, but since then there would have been a lot of things that would have popped up and developed that perhaps need to be addressed as well. But I think it's a good place for us to start with some reading about, because a number of issues were identified in that report that I think are still left untreated. So it's a good idea for people to start reading it and familiarizing themselves with it, and perhaps it could inform a very constructive debate.
I don't know
Certainly.
Actually, what was introduced in 2014 by the People's Partnership was a very comprehensive, like you rightly said, Jayanti. And you're right. It was a step in the right direction, and we wouldn't have been in the position that we are in today if that was allowed to go forward.
Lish, before we close up, I just want to state that, well, first, it was an honor to have Senator Jayanti and MP Saddam. MP Saddam is actually my MP, and I'm going to tell you, he is doing such a fantastic job. MP, you keep doing what you're doing, and I think we will see good things from you in the near future. But I just want to close off with 2 things before Chris actually does the close off. The first thing is that DPP, my message to DPP, defend yourself, brother. Defend yourself. Stay strong. The population of Trinidad and Tobago is definitely behind you. Stay strong. Defend yourself, DPP. And the second thing is Trinidad and Tobago. We may have an election coming up if the Privy Council rules in favor of Razi Balgobin marriage in the local government issue. That is coming up sometime this weekend or early next week. And if that happens, the point that Umar Abdullah and MP Saddam and Senator Jayanti is saying, we have the power with our finger. We will be able to exercise that right if the Privy Council rules in Ravi Balgobin favor. So prepare yourself. It may be coming up sooner rather than later. Thank you very much.
And before Chris closes off as well, I just, as the president of the foundation, I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to MP Saddam Hosein and also Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial. I know how busy you guys are, so taking time to be with us, I mean, I always have to say thanks from the bottom of my heart. Chris, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I want to really thank the panelists, MP, the Member of Parliament for Barrett Area Sanmon, Mr. Saddam Hosein, and of course, Senator Jayanti Lutchmedial for sharing their insights on the challenges facing the office of the DPP. It is clear, and I think by our conversation here tonight, that there's a lot of issues surrounding the office and some of the key players that would have spoken somewhat out of turn. And, you know, it's interesting because as the stories are developing day by day, a new person is getting added to the conversation that is making this a bit more controversial than I think it should be. However, there are also potential solutions for these challenges. And I hope that I saw Senator Lutchmedial in an interview, I believe it was yesterday, and she said that, you know, these men need to get together and have a conversation, the proper one, the appropriate one, outside of the public domain. And I would hope that greater collaboration would be able to assist the justice system. We hope that tonight's discussion has shed light on these important issues, and we look forward to seeing you all next week at the same time with us. So have a great night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you again, guys, for having us, and we hope to continue this conversation. And congratulations on the very good work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.